When we think of the functions of the skeletal system, one of the first things to come to mind is structure or support. Our skeletal system is what provides the support to our body. It creates the basic shape of our body, and it provides a place to put everything. A lot of things are attached in some way to the skeleton. The second thing that most people think about as far as the functions of the skeletal system is protection. Our bones are hard and provide a lot of protection to sensitive areas. Our cranium protects our brain, our rib cage protects our heart and our lungs, and our pelvis protects our pelvic organs. Our bones are also very important for helping us with movement. We would be able to move wiggling like worms if we had no bones, but giving our body bones that the muscles can pull on allows us to create a lot more fine types of movement. Another function of the skeletal system is production of blood cells. Inside of our bones is the bone marrow that contains the cells that divide to create our red and our white blood cells. Another regulatory function of the skeletal system is the regulation of calcium. Our bones are a source of stored calcium and phosphate that can be released as needed. Finally, our bones can help a little bit with the regulation of pH because they can store or release basic compounds. We talked about bone tissue in the histology section, but I'd like to review that and go into a little bit more depth now. There are two types of bone tissue, compact bone and spongy bone. What's shown here is compact bone. Remember that bone is created in units called osteons, and osteon is one of these circular units that we see in bone tissue. In the middle of the osteon, we have the central canal. The central canal is where the blood supply and neurons are that allow this to be a living tissue. Around the central canal, we have concentric layers of bone. And these layers, these concentric circles of bone, are called the lamellae. Between the lamellae, we can see these little spaces, the lacunae, the spaces that actually hold the cells within the bone matrix. These cells are the osteocytes, and they're responsible for maintaining the bone. The osteocytes are connected to each other and to the central canal by tiny little channels called canaliculi. These canaliculi are what allow the osteocytes to reach out to detect what's going on in the bone and also to reach the nutrient source in the central canal. The compact bone is what forms the strong outer surface of the bones. Spongy bone fills the ends of some bones or the middle parts of other bones. And the spongy bone creates a network of spikes called trabeculae. The advantage to spongy bone is that it increases the strength of the bone. It does provide some more strength, and it doesn't add a lot of weight. So we can improve strength without increasing weight. The structure of the trabeculae of the spongy bone is similar to what we see with the compact bone osteons. We do have concentric lamellae. We do have osteocytes and little lacunae that are connected by canaliculi. The difference is in spongy bone we don't have a central canal. The reason we don't need a central canal is that the spongy bone trabeculae are surrounded by a blood supply already, so they don't need to have blood vessels running through the middle of the structure. As we learned in the histology section, bone tissue, like any tissue, is composed of the cells and the extracellular matrix. Let's take a closer look at the cells that we find in bone tissue. Let's start with cells called the osteogenic cells. Osteogenic cells are the precursor to some of the other bone cells, meaning that they're going to become other bone cells. The osteogenic cells are the only types of bone cells that will divide. The rest of them are basically done dividing. So these osteogenic cells divide to make more bone cells. The osteogenic cells are found on the outer and inner surfaces of a bone, and these will become the osteoblasts. Remember that osteo refers to bone and blast is to make, so these are the cells that are going to actively make the bone. These cells go to work wherever bones are growing, and they actively secrete matrix. As these cells are working and secreting the matrix, some of the cells become trapped in the layers of matrix, in the lamellae, and will mature into osteocytes. Osteocytes are osteoblasts, which have become trapped in the bone matrix. The role of these trapped cells, the osteocytes, is to detect any stress to the bone matrix. And when there's stress in the bone matrix, they respond by activating osteoblasts. The osteoblasts are important for building, strengthening, and repairing bone. And so wherever there's stress sensed by the osteocytes, we activate osteoblasts to strengthen bone in that area. The other cells we find in bone are called osteoclasts. Osteoclasts come from a different lineage, meaning they don't come from the osteogenic cells at all. And osteoclasts have the opposite role as the osteoblasts. Osteoclasts dissolve bone matrix. These are pretty cool cells. They sort of seal themselves right onto the surface of the bone, and then they release acid onto the bone surface and releases those matrix components into the blood. This is important for bone growth, for bone repair, and for bone remodeling, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. This is also important for the release of calcium. If there's not enough calcium in your blood, the osteoclasts will break down bone matrix in order to release calcium into the blood. If we turn our attention to the extracellular matrix of the bone, there are two really important components to consider. Those two components are calcium and collagen. The calcium is important to provide strength and hardness to the bone matrix. This is what actually makes the bone matrix hard. The calcium that's found in bone is in a mineral form called hydroxylapatite. Hydroxylapatite makes up about 70% of the bone's weight. If there's not enough calcium in bone, the problem is weak bones that can break easily. In adults, this is often seen as osteoporosis. In healthy, strong bones, there's a thick layer of compact bone on the outside, and the trabeculae of the spongy bone are wide and strong. In osteoporosis, loss of calcium from the bones results in smaller, thinner trabeculae and bones that are a lot more likely to break. When there's not enough calcium in the bones of developing children, we see a different problem. This is rickets. In this situation, there's not enough calcium to strengthen the bones and make them hard, and the bones can actually bend or bow under the weight of the body, resulting in the characteristic bow-legged shape you can see in these pictures of people with rickets. Since vitamin D is necessary for the body to be able to absorb calcium, we see rickets as the result of calcium deficiency or vitamin D deficiency. The importance of the collagen fibers in the bone matrix is flexibility. We don't usually think of bones as being flexible, but bones do have just a little bit of give to them. And this is really important, so when bones experience stress, they can flex a little bit without breaking. If there's not enough collagen in the bones, then the bones become very, very brittle. They can't flex, and instead, even a little bit of stress will break the bones. This is seen in the disorder osteogenesis imperfecta, also called brittle bone syndrome. In this case, there's a genetic defect in the protein collagen. The collagen doesn't form correctly, meaning that it can't provide the flex that the bone needs, and every little stress to the bone results in a break. Interesting aside is that vitamin C is necessary for the formation of collagen. If you don't have enough vitamin C in your diet, you won't be able to form proper collagen. A vitamin C deficiency gives you the condition of scurvy. However, we don't usually see the effects of this in the bones. And that's because if you think about where we find collagen, collagen is all over in all sorts of important connective tissues. If you have a vitamin C deficiency or if you have scurvy, we see the effects of that in the soft tissues well before we see that damage in the bones.